Hey, what's up, guys? We have an awesome podcast this week. James and I were fortunate enough to be able to interview Stuart Harvey Lee of Prime Studio. It was a wonderful podcast. Stuart talks about his work and how he founded the studio, so I hope you enjoy it. We also want to thank our promotional partner, Design Daily at Let's Design Daily on Instagram. You guys know the deal. They're always posting great stuff, so check them out. We also have another promotional partner this week, the IDSA. They're doing a virtual sustainability deep dive June 3rd through the 5th. And there's some awesome presenters like Tucker Viermeister, Gary Hustwit, and Nike's sustainability design lead, Noah Murphy Reinhartz. They'll be deep diving into sustainable business strategies, materials, and processes. So check that out. You can learn more and sign up at idsa.org/SDD2020. Also, as always, you got to follow on Spotify, rate 5 stars, iTunes, subscribe on that YouTube. Also, make sure you're on the Discord if you're not already. I want to hear your thoughts on this episode. And also, got to shout out Kiyoshi the Kid for the amazing intro and outro. All right, guys, I hope you enjoy this episode. Let's get to it. Hey, welcome to Minor Details. I'm Nick.
I'm James.
And I'm Stuart.
And we are 3 designers in the big city, sweating the small stuff. We are super excited to have Stuart Harvey Lee of Prime Studios here today. Stuart has a long list of experiences working for startups and founding his own design studio in New York City, Prime Studios, as well as has some experience at Smart Design and some other places. And we're excited to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
No, it's a pleasure.
Actually, thanks for letting us come to your studio.
Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
If you're watching the YouTube, you can see that we are here at Prime Studios.
Yeah, it's awesome. We've got a beautiful museum of Prime's work through the years behind us, so we can grab stuff as we're talking.
And it's probably the most luxurious space we've ever recorded in.
Yeah, I can actually...
hopefully it's a living museum.
That's true. Yeah. It's a show.
Yeah.
So Stuart, we always like to start off a little bit with your background and your story, and maybe you can just tell us, where you grew up and how you got into design, and where you went to school and things like that.
Yeah, sure. So, like all the best stories, it was a happy accident. So I grew up in the north of England, a little town by the seaside called Scarborough, where, to be honest, I had very little exposure to design at all. I really didn't know what design was until I was actually later in my 20s. I mean, of course, I was aware of it, but I hadn't really registered the fact that it was design per se, So I started off my career actually as an engineer. So I was one of those people I can never remember whether it's right brain or left brain, but I'm pretty good at like the maths and the analytical side of things. Which
I think
one is
that's
that?
Left brain.
Okay.
Right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Well, hopefully I have a bit of both.
Right.
But yeah, I was pretty good on the mathematical side of things. So I actually ended up going to engineering college called Imperial College in London. And the course that I chose to get on there was called Total Technology. It was really mechanical engineering, but in order to do this course, you also had to be sponsored by a firm. And I got sponsored by, it was the old British Steel, British Steel, that then changed to United Engineering Steels. It went through like a number of buyouts and whatever. So for the year before I went to college, I actually went to Sheffield, and I was basically, an undergraduate trainee. So I went through, in essence, what was like an apprenticeship. So, I did the electrical section, learned how to rewire motors. I learned how to weld, learned how to build a toolbox out of sheet metal.
That sounds cool.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It
Yeah.
was a really kind of hands-on practical skill thing. And then I went onto the factory floor, and I went through all the various departments of the steelworks, and I used to go back in the summers there and work in the different departments. And I was like 18 years old, and it was, to be exposed to that heavy industry was just mind-blowing to me. And we used to go out with the fitters and go up on the crane tracks and like fix broken gearboxes on cranes and things like that. It was so scary. I used to have a really, pretty vivid like fear of heights.
Yeah.
Until they set me up on the crane tracks with a block and tackle, and you had to kind of walk along to the crane and over all the melting pits where the ingots were. And
Yeah.
So
Did you like look up to God and you're like, please show me a sign of another way?
yeah. So I learned two things from that. So one thing was that I didn't want to work in heavy engineering.
Yeah.
And then I think the second thing was that I do believe it gave me a really deep appreciation of people that do work in manufacturing. And it's something I always think about as we're, designing products down the line. It's like, what's this going to be like for the person that actually has to assemble this or to make this in the factory? So Imperial College was in South Kensington, and next door was the Royal College of Art. And we used to go to the Royal College of Art for lunch just because the cafeteria was better.
That's funny.
Literally. And that's how I kind of started to get exposed to, the design side of things. So the RCA, the Royal College, it's a postgraduate college. So basically I finished my engineering degree, applied to the RCA and got in to a course called Industrial Design Engineering. So it was basically like industrial design for people with an engineering background.
Oh, that's interesting.
Huh.
I never even heard of that before.
So was there, aside from the good food, was there something, did you see a show of industrial design work? Was there something that made you think like, oh, industrial design, like that's where I want to be?
A little bit, but I also think a lot of it, to be honest, was just moving to London and being exposed to, so many more things than I had done in a little seaside town. That's where I first saw like cool stereo equipment. We used to go down Tottenham Court Road on a Saturday to look in the stereo shops and just like ooh, and then and that's where I first saw like Bang & Olufsen. I'm like,
yeah. There we go.
So there was an affiliation between the two colleges as well. So as I was getting towards the end of my engineering degree, that's when I started to be aware that there was a path to move what I was doing, which was very mathematically based engineering. We were doing, nuclear physics, thermodynamics, all that kind of stuff. But there was a way that I could translate that into design. And I'd always been like a sketcher and all that kind of stuff. When I was a real little kid, I used to obsessively draw motorbikes. And I'd design motorbikes to, go through the desert or something like that. So I guess, even way back then, that's what I'm saying. I didn't necessarily know what design was, but I guess I always had like a kind of a little bit of an inkling towards it.
Right. And there was nobody saying like, oh, there's a degree for, transportation design. At that point, was that really known?
No, I'm going to say my career advice back then was, you're good at maths, you're good at physics, you should be an engineer.
Yeah. It's so crazy how hidden like the design field is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's definitely becoming more mainstream, but it's awesome that we just all stumbled into this thing.
Yeah. So once you got into that program, was it like, did everything click? Was it like, oh, did like a light bulb go off? This is where I've been meant to be? It
clicked in that I knew it was what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah.
I don't think it clicked in terms of I instantly became a designer.
No.
We did a pretty aggressive kind of foundation in design skills and color theory and proportion and all that kind of stuff. But I have to say, a lot of it was that the studio at that time was set up so that the industrial design engineers were in the same studio as the people that were pure industrial designers that had already done an undergraduate degree in industrial design. So a lot of just learning from peers really was what got me going in the design field.
Yeah.
That's really good. So after you graduated, you came to New York City for smart design, or how did that transition
Yeah.
go? How did your after graduation transition work
Well,
out?
there was one thing in between, actually. So the RCA, even back then, actually had a pretty high proportion of foreign students. So it's a 2-year postgraduate course. And so in the summer, I actually, through a Japanese colleague, Japanese colleague on the course, I actually managed to get an internship in Tokyo. And this was back in 1990, yeah. Wow. I'm aging myself. But, and that just completely opened my eyes to the possibilities of the design world, as it were. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
I mean,
jealous.
at that time, like Sony, right, was at its like peak.
It was like at the real zenith of Japanese design, just before that, the whole economy crashed, as it were.
Yeah.
And I worked in a small consultancy. They were sort of half product and half digital.
What was their name? Are they still around? Or?
No, they're not around. They were called Saurus.
Okay.
It was about a 12-person firm. We were working on projects for Ricoh. We did it was almost like a dedicated email computer.
Interesting.
It was kind of like a tethered tablet that allowed you
Huh.
to send messages to people in your office.
And it was just email.
Yeah, just email. And then, I worked on a few other projects. I did designed some bathware for Toto, and we worked on some furniture for department stores. It was pretty varied, actually.
Yeah.
And I think that experience was one of the things that made me realize that I craved that variety, and that's why I always wanted to work in an agency. So then, when I graduated, which was 91, the economy in England was dreadful. It was like a major recession, and it was after the Thatcher years, and manufacturing had been kind of decimated in England at that point. So there just really wasn't that many design jobs.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that I'd been to Japan kind of made me realize I could go anywhere in the world, and I didn't have to stay, in England. So my girlfriend, who's now my wife, she'd moved out to New York the year before. She's a fashion designer. So I had a bit of an in to New York. So I got a summer job in a department store in the lighting department. I sold lights, basically. And I saved up $1,000. And I literally came with like a suitcase, $1,000 in a portfolio.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy.
That's awesome.
I love that.
And it was one of those things when the $1,000 was gone, I was going to have to get on a plane back home. But
Yeah.
so I'd actually visited New York a couple of times. I'd been out to see her, and I did some sort of preliminary interviews at a couple of places. And smart design was always my dream job. So, I went to interview there as soon as I got here. They were kind of number one on my list that I was going to speak to. And it seemed to go well, but it was one of those things. It just wasn't a position there. So, I continued interviewing around. I mean, at that point, Teague was still around in New York. I interviewed at people like, Echo.
Yeah.
Eric was one of the first people that ever interviewed me. He was a lovely guy. And I picked up a little bit of freelance work, so that was helping to pay the bills a little bit. But the funds were running pretty low. And then one day, and this is such a classic New York story. So one day I went and I was having a chat with these two women that had a little firm, Able Design, and we were talking and looking through my portfolio and things like that. And then all of a sudden, one of the women who was the partner in the firm, her name was Lisa Crone. She's out in, I think she's out in LA now, actually.
Okay,
but she's out in
cool.
California. Anyway.
Yeah.
She said to me, you know what, I was speaking to the guys at Smart the other day, and they'd met this English guy recently, and they wanted to get back in touch with him, but they'd lost his information. And
you're like, that was me?
You're like, I have a product that can give them my email. They can send it to me. No.
Yeah, so...
Wait, was it really... Maybe it was another English guy that they... And then you sent...
And so that I called him up the next day.
Okay.
And spoke to Tucker, and he was like, oh my God, I'm so happy you called.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I went in, and they said, yeah, someone just left. And I interviewed the rest of the partners and got a job at Smart.
Yeah. That's a real word of encouragement for hopeless romantics. Like,
Yeah.
maybe they just lost your number. That's great.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh, man. I don't know if we need to be promoting that. There's going to be a bunch of students just calling off the hook. Hey, did you lose my number? Hey, did you lose my number? I didn't hear back.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So at Smart Design, I mean, I know we've talked to a few smart people, but can you tell us about your experience there? Like, did you get to work on any of the OXO products your time there? Or?
Yeah. So I was lucky that I did work a lot on OXO, and actually Sam was still with the company then. Such an amazingly inspirational client.
He seems to have had an impact on everybody who's worked with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I could just sit in a room and listen to Sam Farber talk all day. And the office was pretty small. It was when it was still on 18th Street. So I think when I joined, there was probably 12 or 14 people. There were 4 partners there at that point. Tucker and Davin and Tom Dare and Tamara was on the graphic side of things. And it's really where I cut my teeth. I mean, that's how I learned to design products that could be made.
Yeah.
You know, there was such a wealth of talent there that would help kind of mentor you and, tell you can't mold it like that. All those sort of like DFM things that, to be honest, you can only learn when you're starting to do it for the first time.
Yeah.
It always feels like that first year out of school, you learn as much as you did the entire 4 years of school,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Were there any kind of significant projects that you remember kind of working on at Smart? Or?
Yeah, there was a few. I mean, as I said, I worked a lot on OXO. I was heavily involved in working with Johnson & Johnson, actually. We worked a lot for their dental division. So toothbrushes and floss systems and all that kind of stuff. And that was really informative to me too, because that was the first time I was kind of going to corporate presentations.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so, we would go out there to, I forget exactly where it was, Princeton maybe, or just near Princeton. There's they had an amazing IMP designed headquarters, and, we would go there and, make our little presentations. Back then it was all markers and,
Right.
markers and models that we'd made in the workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was, back in the days of like Photoshop 1.0. There was no undo. I remember that.
Yeah.
There was no undo in Photoshop. What?
Oh
That's
my
crazy.
gosh. I mean, that's kind of amazing at the same time. It's like, well, you just got to go with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things, even back in the steelworks when, when I was doing my undergraduate training, the way that I learned to draft was using ink on vellum, not even pencil, ink. That
No erasing.
Straight to ink.
Straight to ink, yeah.
If you make a mistake, throw it all away.
Yeah, and it makes you think, makes you very careful about what you do.
Well, I'm curious if we can go back for a second to RCA. I mean, what was the training there for visualization? Was it pretty typical industrial design, markers and things like that, or?
Yeah, by then we were into CAD a little bit. But yeah, there was a lot of markers, a lot of sketching, a lot of models. There was a big emphasis on model making and prototyping. They had amazingly equipped shop, as it were, and technicians that would help you out.
What type of modeling materials?
A lot of Ren shape, but there was also, you could CNC things and whatever. I remember once I did a design and it was for a wall-mounted blender.
All right.
Okay.
You know, it
I'm
was
with you.
It was one of those. No one has any countertop
Yeah,
space.
right,
I'll
right.
do
Yeah.
a wall mount with Blender,
Okay.
and there was like blade storage and 2 different containers. Anyway, I made this model, and one of the technicians helped me because it was a really tricky vac forming job on the jugs itself, and I created a background. I tiled a piece of plywood. You know, had the blender on there so it looked like it was on the tile backsplash. Took it down to the photo studio to do the photos. I got 1 photo before it fell off. Completely smashed into smithereens.
Oh, that's that studio nightmare.
We
kinda stuff.
spent, I must have spent, I don't know, 100 hours on this model.
Yeah. How good was the photo though?
Well, luckily it was like, you know, half decent exposure.
Oh my God, I can't imagine.
One photo, just like,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I did want to ask you about just RCA in general because it has such a great reputation and prominent alumnus.
Yeah.
Like, what is it about RCA that gives it that reputation? Can you speak to that experience for you? And
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the fact that it's purely a postgraduate school plays into that.
just the dedication level of the students.
Yeah, I think so. You know, people are really there for a reason, you know?
Yeah.
And they really want to, you know, get something out of it and achieve something. So that's definitely one side of it. I mean, we would work pretty much 9 to 9.
Yeah.
You know, 5 days a week or 6 days a week, actually.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it, you know, the teaching was great, but really, to be honest, it was all about the peers.
Yeah.
And it was the peers that were pressing each other because it was quite a competitive environment, at least during the time I was there.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some collaborations with other departments, which were, you know, amazing. But it was also, like I said, I mean, going back to that thing, we were all, I think, acutely aware that there weren't that many jobs to go around at the end of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was supportive and competitive at the same time.
Yeah. Do you keep in touch with any of those people?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's also a little interesting how you start out engineering, and this is actually a common question that we get. We have a good few engineer listeners who kind of want to transition into the industrial design field, and I'm more curious around how was that degree, that industrial design engineering degree, kind of different from a traditional industrial design degree? Did they like break you of some of your, you know, very, you know, systematic constraints and try to get you to explore more creatively?
No, it was, you had to show a more methodical approach to the design, but also you had to take things to a much more detailed technical level. So, for example, my sort of thesis project was a digital camera, which of course doesn't sound like so amazing back then, but you know, it wasn't just enough to like figure out the UI and figure out the form, as it were. I had to do like all the lens optics to actually prove that like something like, you know, that it was actually feasible, as it were, within the package that I was talking about. And there was, you know, an articulated kind of handle that actually moved the screen, and you know, I had to figure out like the gearing for that and how it was all going to work. So it was more in depth, I think, than some of the ID students had to prove.
I see. So it was more of a combination. Like they relied on your engineering abilities. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I mean, some of the guys there. I mean, one of the guys, Mark Bickerstaff, who ended up, I think he was like head of design at Kohler for a long time. I mean, he built an electric bike for his thesis project. It was amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Like rode away on it.
Yeah,
like
literally.
that was the end of his thesis. He rode off and you never saw him again.
Off into the dust, yeah.
It's the countryside.
Yeah, it was pretty hard work in that respect.
Yeah.
You know, you had to satisfy the engineering components of it as well as the design components.
Yeah, that's really impressive. No, that's awesome. So I guess back to smart design, I guess you had a great time there designing these You got a little taste of the toothbrush and the hygiene industry, which you've also done some now with Prime Studios, but we'll get to that.
So was OXO already a client when you showed up, or yeah? Okay.
So OXO had been launched, I think, about 4 or 5 years when I was there.
Oh, okay.
So we were doing obviously line extensions, but thinking about some of the offshoot lines as well. So I worked quite a lot on OXO. Like I said, I did Johnson & Johnson. There was a lot of like little minor projects on the phone. I did a really involved project with was to design. Actually, it was like dedicated. They're called trade-in turrets. Basically, dedicated telephone systems for stock traders.
Okay.
That was very sort of research and UI based. And I worked really closely with Dan Formoso. I don't know if you know Dan. Amazing guy. You should interview Dan, actually. He's much more interesting than I am. And, we got to, go visit all the trading floors, talk to the stock traders about, how they operated. I mean, it was a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
I remember the company that we were doing it for, the president of the company had a yacht in the old World Trade Center yacht base. And I remember... They always used to make me do the presentations because I think maybe it was the English accent. I remember one summer's afternoon having to present to all these, the Bear Stearns telecom manager and things like that downstairs in this yacht, and we were just rocking like really slowly side to side. And I'm not a good sailor.
Oh no!
And it was a fairly high pressure thing as well.
Oh man,
it was a tough one.
That's a
Did
great
you have
story.
to run out of the room at any
No,
point? You kept it together?
I kept it together.
That's good.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
But no, I mean, I worked with. I was lucky, I worked with Tucker V. Meister. Davin was an amazing mentor to me. I'm still in touch with Davin. There were some great designers went through the doors at the time that I was there. Like Scott Henderson was there at the same time as me.
Yeah.
Dave Peschel, who's out in California now. Steve Allendorf, Steve Russack. Yes, some really, really, top-notch sort of friends. And I'm still in touch with a lot of them.
Yeah.
Actually.
I mean, that's awesome just to gain all those connections as well.
Yeah.
So how did you transition from Smart and then you went to Able Design? Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I felt I was actually working too much on OXO. I sort of, I think maybe had a bit of an affinity for housewares, or maybe do have an affinity for housewares. But ironically, I kind of said to myself, I don't want to get pigeonholed being a housewares designer. Of course, now you look now and there's like a ton of housewares here, But and the opportunity came up. Lisa Crone, who I mentioned to you, who was the one that told me about the position, she'd moved to California, and her partner, Martha Davis, had this company, Able Design, much smaller consultancy. So I joined forces with her and went there as design director.
Okay.
And it was much, much smaller. We were down on 21st Street. Actually, it was only 3 blocks away from Smart at that point. And, we did a variety of just run-of-the-mill sort of industrial design projects. It's kind of like, design me a toaster kind of thing. But we worked a lot on the redesign of ortho tricycline contraceptive systems, which was really super interesting. That's where I first got exposed to sort of really in-depth consumer research.
Yeah. You might have to explain a little bit more about that.
So it's birth control,
Right.
basically. Yeah. So at the time, what happened was the pills came in a dispenser, which was in essence like a single-use plastic dispenser.
Right.
You threw it away. And so they were moving to a system where you would have a permanent dispenser and then you would just refill it with a foil blister pack. But of course, you have to be super careful when you're talking about prescription medicines like that, so that there needs to be no way that somebody, because birth control pills, the estrogens and all the additives, as it were. I'm not sure exactly what's in it at this point. They change throughout the cycle, and that's what brings on a period. So you need to make sure that nobody could go back and take the wrong pill by mistake, and that people understand it. And then just like the whole messaging and packaging system. So yeah, it was a super interesting project.
Yeah. So what did that user research look like?
A lot of focus group testing, basically. That's a lot of focus group testing. And in-home use tests, we used to... they would create prototypes which could kind of time and date stamp when somebody actually took a pill.
Oh, interesting.
So because birth control is more efficacious when you take it at the same time every day, as it were. So they were really curious about what people's patterns were, about how they did, how they were taking the medication. And that actually morphed into a job that we did. I'm not sure if it's still around, but it was called the Personal Pack. And it was taking this sort of very nondescript beige sort of pill dispenser and sort of cosmeticizing it, for want of a better word. We almost wanted to make it look like a makeup compact. And the reason being that, not because we were trying to make it look pretty, but we wanted people to not feel embarrassed to like put their birth control out on the counter or to carry it with them, that if their purse opened in public, that everyone wouldn't point at it and just say, because again, it was all that thing about just trying to increase efficacy, as it were.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, just doing that much research, I mean, that's a completely different kind of side of the design world that I don't even think we get to touch on very often.
No.
Is like medical and how in-depth that research can be.
Yeah. So those focus groups, were they like one-way mirror type things?
Yeah, it's the classic.
Can you just rent out one-way mirror spaces?
Oh,
yeah. I mean, I assume you can.
There's full companies that will run focus groups and everything for you.
Yeah.
We did one when I was back at my the pet company. We got to see like people talk about pet toys and stuff.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It kind of feels like weird because it's like you're spying on them, but they know that there's people behind the mirror.
Yeah, they know. And they a good moderator tells them and explains and all that kind of stuff. And supposedly you're not going to interact with the people, but I was out in Minneapolis a few months ago. We actually did focus groups where the whole team actually went in and met the respondents at the end of it. Which
interesting.
Which was interesting. First time I had ever done that.
And how did they respond to that?
It was I think nice for them actually to see that that these were real people that cared about what their thoughts were, and not just some blank corporate types.
Yeah. I think we as designers always assume like, well, of course people would want to meet us. Like we're making these cool things that they use, but yeah, I don't know. Like
until you're the one on the other side of the mirror and someone's trashing your design, or can't figure out how to get the top off.
Yeah, where you're like, I heard what you said.
Are you stupid? Of course you squeeze there.
Oh man,
banging on the glass.
That would be a bad focus group. I don't think that would work out.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, focus groups are interesting actually. You do. I think you only learn so much. People are very incremental in what they respond to.
Yeah.
And what they want is things that are just a little bit better than what they currently have. They don't necessarily. I don't think like the big idea ever came out of a focus group, but it is an important way to dial in those last 10% of the details.
That's like a good barometer.
Yeah, I do like that point because sometimes it does feel, and I know that there's a lot of students listening that it feels like that is the research is like the foundation, and it very much is. But a lot of times, I think people do miss that kind of spark of innovation that maybe a focus group might miss, and so I think that was a good way to put it, of like dialing in that last 10%.
Yeah. Because there is sometimes at the end of a project where determining those details kind of it doesn't feel as, I don't know, it doesn't feel like maybe there's as much at stake for you personally, like when you're talking about CMF or those final details, and to have somebody else
Yeah.
kind of vocalize those ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, Stuart, were there any other kind of you were a design director at Able Design, and I guess previously at Smart you were a senior designer. So how was that transition? I'm guessing that you did some more managing and kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small company, so I was still very hands-on at that point. I think, looking back on it, I would say that my time at Smart Design was where I learned how to design.
Mm-hmm.
My time at Able Design was where I learned how to run a design business. So I was very involved in the pitching and writing the proposals, and proposals are, the dirty little secret of the design world. It's like the hardest thing to do is to write a proposal.
Oh, right. Let's spill those secrets.
Well, it's kind of twofold. So, people come to you with a brief, and some briefs are better than others. And, you have to really try and predict the path of a project, and then, assign a fee to that, you know. And depending on how well you've predicted it, that's kind of how much profit you make, And of course, some clients are better than others in understanding if scope changes or whatever. But it's also a lot of clients need that guidance of like, hey, this is the point at where we should be plugging in some prototyping, or this is the point where it's important to start to get like vendor feedback so that we don't go too far down the path before we figure out that it's going to not be cost effective to make it that way.
Have you had any hard lessons?
I think like every week is a lesson, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an iterative process. I mean, it's one of those things, the more you do it, the more you understand. And, we're in an agency situation where like every project's different. It's like we never have a singular sort of cookie cutter process. Every proposal and every project plan we write is custom to the client because everyone has different needs.
Yeah. That's a good point, because oftentimes you find those design studios that just like, or I feel like it's younger designers. I see their portfolios on their website, and they put out the process of like, it's like a cookie cutter thing.
Oh yeah, it's like we have a 5-step trademark process, and we pop your project in here, and the success comes out. Anyone ever tells that, you just run away from it. Walk out the door.
Oh man.
Yeah, so how do you, I guess you're saying that in the proposal you are setting out a custom plan, and is that based on, that's based on meetings that you've had with the client to understand?
Yeah, we try and really do as much sort of upfront, backwards and forwards and research with the client, because really, what you're trying to do is understand the reason behind the project. Not how the project is going to actually pan out. And so the more client contact you have, and we'll provide sort of templates to clients that aren't used to writing design briefs, so that they can give us the information that they need to make sure that we're meeting their needs when they need it.
Yeah,
that's especially important, like on the work that we do with the startups.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's interesting. So you're actually giving them a brief and saying, what do you think you need from us?
No, we're giving them basically a template and saying, this is the information that we need from you in order for us to put together like an effective project plan.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And you're digging down really deep to like the core reason that this thing should even exist.
Yeah. And so are you oftentimes changing somebody's perception of what they think they're looking for?
Yeah, we definitely push back.
Yeah.
If we feel that, their previous thinking hasn't been, robust enough yet.
Yeah. And does that, do you lose potential clients because of that, or are they pretty receptive to it? Maybe it's a mix.
I'm going to be honest, if they don't want to hear what we've got to say, why do we want to work with them?
Yeah, that's a bad way to start off.
Yeah. I guess like as freelancers, or, you know, I can speak from my own experience. Sometimes I'm hesitant to come in just as an individual and say, well, you're addressing the wrong problem. But it is, I don't know. It's interesting that, you know, that's your brand, is like, we're here to figure out the problem that you're trying to solve. And I feel like sometimes with freelancers, people are just like, we just need to hire a, you know, gunslinger to do the job.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we go through that as well.
Yeah.
And there'll be, you know, decisions that clients make on which designs to go forward with that, you know, maybe we don't agree with, but at that point you're, you know, 70% of the way through the project, and you're not just going to walk away and leave them in the lurch.
Right.
So, you know, you go ahead and finish the project, and, you know, maybe you're not as, you don't believe it was the right decision, but it's, you know, you're not going to leave them in the lurch. And, you know, I'm going to say the position between me, like running an agency, and you as a freelancer is exactly the same. I always say a freelancer is an agency of one.
Yeah.
So those whole client relationship skills are no different to what I go through on everyday basis.
That's interesting insight for
Yeah.
sure.
You just have, I feel like where you have maybe a slight advantage is just a body of work that you can say, listen, like, you should really listen to me because I've proven these results. And maybe at the start of a freelancer's career, it's harder to say, like, well, you should listen to me because
Right. Well, you've got a
look
body
at
of
my
work too,
student
though.
work.
Look at my student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just like building up that body of work and just time. But no, that's awesome. And so, Stuart, I want to hear about the leap of faith from going from Able Design and doing your own thing.
Yeah.
Because that's always a scary thing.
It was a leap of faith. Yeah, for one reason or another, I just felt it was time to leave Able. I don't really want to get into that too much, but I literally, again, it was one of those things. I didn't really have a plan, and I walked out of Able one day. I had a couple of clients that I was actually freelancing with when I was at Smart Design. I was doing a couple of freelance jobs on the side, and I took those to Able, and they came with me when I left Able, but I didn't really have any clients, and I literally started working on, you know, my kitchen table. That was it.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
It was purely on your own, or did you have anybody that you kind of took with you, or?
No, I have to say, my biggest regret is that I started Prime Studio on my own. I wish that, in retrospect, that I'd teamed up with a couple of partners and we'd all gone into it together.
Yeah.
And why do you say that? Is it just the amount of work, or just having different perspectives, or?
It's different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of a support structure, but I also think as well it's just a lot of responsibility. You know, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, like, the guys out there, you know, are dependent on me to make sure that we have the business so that I can pay their wages so they can feed their families. You know, it's and so. And, you know, when you're the sole owner of a firm, you know, all that responsibility ultimately, you know, rests on your shoulders.
Right. Yeah, you're responsible for paying people's salary and stuff. That's a little nerve-wracking. I can see that for sure.
Yeah. The other thing is that, you know, no one teaches you how to run a business or a design business, you know. So there's just definitely been moments throughout my career where I just really would have liked to have someone else there as a sounding board.
Yeah.
You know.
No, that's an interesting insight as well.
Yeah. But
that being said, it's nice not to have to answer to anyone else.
what did you gain starting Prime over continuing to work at like a Smart Design or another agent? Was it purely ownership? Was it that, or was there a specific point of view that you felt like you weren't able to?
You know, I think I've always been reasonably entrepreneurial. And I think the time was right for me to control my own destiny a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, Able, shortly after I left, got bought by Razorfish, which was one of the early big digital agencies in town. So I have no regrets about leaving Able at that time.
Yeah.
I do think about what would have happened if I'd stayed at Smart. Because they, when I started, there was maybe 12, 14 people. When I left, there was probably 30, and then their growth just went on a skyrocket.
Yeah, I hear they're hiring. No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe I'll call David.
Oh man.
But yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to get to the prime section of this because
Yeah, like how did you grow it? I mean, you're at your kitchen table.
yeah.
You have a couple clients with you.
They were small projects.
Small projects.
Yeah.
What was that next step? Like, how did you get the word out? Did you do any self-promoting or?
Yeah, I mean, I was a hustler.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I'm kind of a bit of an entrepreneur. I used to sell cars through college to pay my way.
Yeah.
My dad's a used car salesman. I mean, I think
Okay.
some of that probably rubbed off on me. So yeah, I would literally go and cold call people.
Oh wow. Okay.
And just get the work that way. And then there was a little bit of work which we used to get. That's when I first started doing structural packaging. So there would be certain brand agencies around who didn't have structural packaging expertise. So they would get a project to redesign Tropicana or something like that, and they were redesigning the brand identity and the look and feel of the bottles and the labels, as it were, but they needed structural concepts to show those on. So I started working as a kind of independent contractor, really.
Okay.
For a couple of brand agencies like that.
And then at some point, I assume you hired a person. You brought on people and.
Yeah. So we went through a couple of rounds. It was a slow growth, to be honest. I mean, I used to work with a lot of people on a freelance basis. I don't think we actually officially hired anyone, salaried employee, for maybe 4 years.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. I used to do a lot of the work myself. I was an agency of one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's just I gave myself a name.
yeah, that's actually what I was going to ask you. Why Prime and not Stuart Harvey Lee Design?
Well, I was never interested in staying that small or being an individual.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want to be Stuart Harvey Lee Design. I wanted to make sure that I was hopefully going to create an environment where people could come and grow and feel part of it. And I mean, every patent that we sign, anyone who works on it, is always part of that patent. Anything that we get promoted in terms of an award, we always make sure that all the designers are called out on that and what their role was. I think a lot of that was down to those years at Smart. I mean, they were very nurturing and like a family. And it's I wanted to try and replicate that, I think.
Yeah. Did you, during the time that you were creating Prime, did you reach out to, were you getting any sort of advice from those people that you had worked with at Smart? Did you have any mentors as you were starting this process on your own?
Not
or
really.
Was it, yeah?
Not really. I mean, the mentors that I had, it wasn't really, I wouldn't call them mentors, but there was a few graphic design agencies that I used to talk to, because basically we weren't competition. And it comes down to that, being a business owner is a lonely place sometimes. I mean, obviously I talked to a bunch of the guys that own firms, in the city and, well, all over, but, and we share sort of stories from the trenches, as it were, but it can only go so far.
Right.
Whereas talking to these people who were starting graphic design firms, they were going through all the same headaches that I was, and all the same things about how do you get clients, how do you manage business, how do you deal with this.
Yeah.
But it wasn't competition.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I will say, you do now have a pretty wide breadth of branding work.
Yeah.
From Prime Studio.
Yeah.
And how does that? I mean, how did you start doing the branding side of design? I mean, trained industrial designer, you start doing some more brands and.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird for an industrial designer. Like a lot of my inspiration has always come from graphics. I'm not quite sure why, but I mean, going back to you talked to me about those. How were you first exposed to design? I can clearly remember this one instance. There was a magazine came out in probably the early 80s in England called The Face, and you should Google it or find a picture. And it was kind of like a fanzine. It was like a pop culture magazine that was like off on left field, and it had a custom designed typeface for the logo, and the A in the face was a pure triangle. And I remember looking at it and just having this absolute aha moment in like, oh, you can subvert things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
look it up. I'll put it up on the video.
Yeah. So the magazine was art directed by Neville Brody, who's an amazing graphic designer. I actually got to meet him a year or so ago, and it was like a major moment for me.
It looks like they're still around.
I think they just relaunched, actually.
Yeah, because I see Harry Styles on here, and he definitely wasn't around in the 70s.
Yeah.
But this is really cool.
But yeah, going back to your question, Nick. So it's part of that startup thing that happened, and we'd done work with a couple of startup companies previously. I mean, everyone does, obviously. But Harry's was really the one that opened the floodgates for us.
Yeah, let's dive into Harry's. I think that's a good. I mean, I shaved this morning with Harry's. How'd I look?
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Close shave.
Touch his face.
Yeah.
So yeah, how did you nail that project? Like, how did you get into the startup scene?
So it was a very roundabout way that we were introduced to the two partners at Harry's when they were still in the very formative part of developing the company. So literally the company was the two partners.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they had already engaged with a branding agency, Partners in Spade, who are now called Mythology. So the weird thing is that the guy who's the president or the founder of Partners in Spade is an amazingly talented guy called Anthony Spaduti. Like, probably one of the most insightful people I know. Back in the day, he taught me Photoshop so that we could do the renderings of those little ortho personal pack cosmetic things. He was the one that taught me how to do the shading and then do the layers out so that we could change colors and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, fast forward 15 years or 20 years, I suppose. Well, 15 years. And we got introduced to them, and Partners in Spade had done the initial brand positioning.
Okay.
And the two partners came here, Jeff and Andy, and we just, hit it off. I mean, I think that we understood what their vision was. And so they engaged us to do the industrial design. And then, we worked with them as they built the team out at Harry's. But we also, we introduced them to their initial manufacturing partners in Asia. And I actually, I went out to China with Andy to go check on the factories, to do due diligence and check on first tooling and all that kind of stuff. And we also we introduced them to their external IP council. I'm not sure how much you know, but around razors and shaving, there's an awful lot of IP. So we basically took them through that entire manufacturing process, and it was one of those things that we were saying to them, now's the time we need to make a first proto. Now's the time we need to make a weighted proto. Now the time we need to make something which has enough fidelity that we can shave with it,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting how far you take the clients. Like, you even went to China just to check on the manufacturing and everything.
Right. That's not the norm, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think some of your background in the engineering really shines through in those scenarios?
I think what happened, I mean, we Prime had been going a long time before Harry's came along. And we had worked on some like pretty major programs with some large CPG companies, like Unilever, we used to do a lot of work for, as it were. And as the design consultants, we were almost the conduit, as it were, that everything else fed through. So, you know, obviously we'd be talking to the brand teams, but we'd be talking to people on the supply side, and we'd be talking to people, you know, on the consumer research side, as it were. But we were like a little hub in the middle. And I think that being one of those people that helps piece together where a project is and where it needs to move, and also understands that different people have, you know, that everyone wants to see the success of a project, but people may have like very different competing goals.
Yeah.
You know, obviously on the brand side, they want to get to market as fast as possible, you know. So I think what it taught me was like how to be a manager or a project manager. And then that same experience like helped me teach people that hadn't done that before, hadn't developed product before, like what they needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like that is a much, it almost feels like you are like an in-house team that startups can kind of use to create a product. Like it's you're reaching out into areas that I've never really even experienced, like that whole IP thing. Like that's, you know, that's a whole nother area of like expertise. I just think that's interesting. And the, you know, the Harry's razor's really beautiful and amazing. I don't know, is there any interesting stories about kind of the design of how you created it? It's very simple, clean.
Well, you know, it's very simple, but and that was definitely the brief.
Yeah.
But you know, if you actually take apart a Harry's razor, like a Harry's Truman razor, it's actually kind of complicated inside. So, you know, we didn't approach it just from the point of view of we're going to sculpt a good-looking handle, as it were. You know, we literally tested every razor out there. I mean, oh my God. I mean, you've got a nice clean shave, but the amount of nicks and cuts that we used to come in with. So, you know, part of that was understanding, you know, razor geometry. Part of it is understanding, you know, preferred weights. You know, you need to have a certain amount of weight to make you feel comfortable, but you don't want to have too much weight.
Yeah.
A lot of it actually comes down to the balance of weight as well. You want to make sure that, you know, we'd sculpted the handle so that we had like a little bit of a fatter belly so that it rolls between, you know, your fingers, but then we have like, you know, details up in the neck area for like, you know, minor little adjustments that you make. Everyone's just making ever so slight minor adjustments all the time that they're doing it. And if you just made that out of a solid piece, it would be bottom heavy. So one of the things that we did was, you know, go do a lot of backwards and forwards with the manufacturing vendors about not only how to make the thing in the first place, but to make it so that we had the right weight balance. So there's actually, it might have changed now, but I don't think too much. But there's a zinc core, but you couldn't do a solid zinc core because then it got too heavy.
Right.
We couldn't do an aluminum core because there was something about the corrosion resistance that we didn't want to do, and and also the aluminum wasn't going to give us the right click when the head went on.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a zinc core, but then there's also a polycarbonate belly piece, and that's really almost like filler. And then it all gets overmolded, and that's what gives you the right distribution. That's what makes it such a good razor.
That's cool. I think you actually, on the landing page of the website, there's sort of an exploded view of the razor.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's kind of a moment of pride for me, I think.
Yeah.
In that, you know, it looks really simple, but actually it's because all that thought went into it that makes what looks really simple a great product.
Right.
And it feels like beautiful too. Like it's I love the idea about balancing it perfectly so that you can maneuver it on your face.
Yeah, and I imagine what maybe was not so simple was the mechanism to hold the razors on because of the IP. I mean, was that a challenge at all?
No, not initially actually, because when Harry's first started, they were using an existing blade cartridge from a factory in Germany that they'd sourced. So that click mechanism, that retention mechanism, was already set.
Okay.
So since then, they actually bought the factory. And, we ended up working with Harry's for about 3 or 4 years. And we actually eventually got involved in the design of the actual cartridge heads themselves, as well as like many other projects as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, the thing that I've always really appreciated about Prime is I feel like while everything that you put out does feel like it feels very like fresh and new, but at the same time it also feels familiar, and I feel like everything that I've seen out of the studio ages very well. Like every product, I've never been like, gosh, that's such a early 2000s product or a 90s product. I feel like there's just a really refined feel to everything that it just now feels as much now as it did then. Is there like what is your... I
appreciate you saying that.
What is your approach? What is your philosophy around aesthetics when you're designing a product like the Harry's razor or anything?
Well, I mean, I take a lot of pride in trying to give everyday objects a little bit of personality. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of nuance to, proportion and aesthetics and CMF that I think is really important. Mm-hmm. So, we'll go through a lot of iterations, not because the client wants us to, but just because we want to, as it were,
Yeah.
And, I was thinking about this on the way in this morning, and I don't know if this is because of the age I was or the background I had, where so much of the work that we did originally was more hands-on, rather than sculpting in CAD, we would sculpt by hand, so I think it gives you a different appreciation for form and proportion.
Yeah, I definitely agree, for sure. And I guess even at RCA, you said that it was very model heavy. So
yeah.
That's a good point.
I always really, try and encourage the guys out there to just get out of the computer a little bit and work with the physical. Doesn't matter if it's even bits of foam core or styrofoam or whatever, Sometimes you just need to actually sculpt something yourself, because as you're in there standing away, things will present themselves to you, or opportunities will present themselves to you that maybe you don't get if you're just concentrating on trying to build that perfect SolidWorks model and wondering how to do that loft or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can also feel it immediately. Whereas if a mistake happens in SolidWorks, it's not like, oh, well, that feels great in my hand. Unless you print it immediately. Yeah. But
we got to get in VR. I got the VR gloves now. You can put that on. I'm just kidding.
I mean, product designers, are we product designers or industrial designers? I don't know. We were having this conversation the other day.
From what I've seen in job searching in LA, product design seems to have been co-opted by the UX UI.
I know. I started as an industrial designer. Well, I was an industrial design engineer. It took me took me 15 years to be able to be a product designer, and now I'm back to being an industrial designer.
That's funny.
But we make physical stuff.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't make all physical stuff virtually. I mean, obviously there's a time and a place for CAD and modeling, and certainly when you get into, if you're getting into the more complex analyticals and finite element and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to do that in our workshop in the back, But I'm a big believer in, we still sketch a lot by hand.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely still the best way to communicate with the team quickly, and to iterate.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I love that. I wish we could talk about every single project you have here. We didn't even get to pull anything out. You also have done projects for IKEA.
Yeah.
And I just kind of want to hear a little bit about that backstory, because IKEA to me seems a little bit of a black box in a way. Like, it doesn't seem like you can just call them up and be like, hey, can I work with you guys? Or like...
No, and it didn't happen like that either.
Okay.
So this was like, I'm going to say back in around about 2000. And the ex-creative director of IKEA, though he still had a lot of affiliations, had moved to New York. And for some reason, he persuaded IKEA that he wanted to do a lighting project. So his big idea was that IKEA is modern Scandinavian designed by modern Scandinavians. If you go there, it's like a bunch of, 25-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyed people.
Right.
They're all supremely talented, but, they're of that culture.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he had told them, he basically persuaded the people at IKEA that he thought it would be an interesting experiment to get an outsider's view of modern Scandinavian design. So he recruited a team of 4 of us here in New York. So there was myself as, I'm going to say, like the pure industrial designer. There was a guy called Robert Lewis, who was more of a lighting designer, but more craft. He would weave his own lampshades and weld his own fixtures, all that kind of stuff. There was an architect, Wayne Turrett, who went between sort of retail, restaurant, and just regular home environments. And Harry Allen. Do you guys know Harry?
The name is
Yeah.
Yeah.
Work.
And Harry blurs that boundary between like product design, and he also worked on the retail side of things. Like he's the guy that designed Moss, like the famous store on Green Street, and so we all had like different specialities. And we met together over a period of about 6 weeks to kind of brainstorm on ideas for lighting, but like also lighting in the sort of Scandinavian environment and what that meant. The whole idea about IKEA is that you furnish with light. So, in most modern Scandinavian rooms, there's not like a single light in the middle of the ceiling, as it were. It's and it's so dark there all of the year.
Yeah.
That you can create different moods through having different types of lighting sources of different intensities. I mean, even in here, look, I'm kind of doing it myself, and so we did this kind of collaborative brainstorming thing for about 6 weeks, and then we split and went off and developed our own designs.
Yeah.
And then all flew off to Sweden to go present them at IKEA, which was just an amazing experience.
That's really cool. It's like this little think tank IKEA experiment. I love that.
So if you look over there, that light there is one of the original lamps that they produced. It's called the Hargo. And if you look on the wall behind you, that's my original presentation sketch.
Oh man, we'll have to post some photos of that as well.
All in colored pencil.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was that like at the time? Was that the way that you typically presented things,
No,
or this was for the Scandinavian audience?
For some reason, and I don't know why I didn't push back on this, but they said, "Oh, we want all of the drawings to be in colored pencil."
Oh, it was them pushing. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Did they have? I mean, it's a pretty big drawing here.
Oh my God! I did a floor lamp.
Oh, you had it's full scale.
Full
scale.
I drew a full scale floor lamp.
Wow.
So you have
3-armed, everything.
Yeah.
We prototyped it, the whole thing. That was another one. This was like a hanging pendant.
Oh
Wow.
my gosh. Yeah, we're going to drop these pictures in after.
Yeah.
But that's incredible. Why? Yeah. Did you understand why they?
No. I still to this day don't understand why they wanted a pencil drawing. But I actually kind of enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
There's something kind of like, doing that wood grain. There's something kind of crafty about it.
It's amazing because I've never had a client be like, present. Like, I want you to present in Play-Doh. Like, I want you to do this very specific weird thing.
Yeah, and I guess at that point I was so awestruck by the fact I'm like, oh my God, I'm designing stuff for IKEA.
Yeah.
I would have, done the sketches in charcoal. You want gouache?
Yeah.
I wonder if it's more of like a romantic thing.
Yeah.
If it's more of like that, like Scandinavian, like, oh, we the good designers like all have like beautiful like colored pencil sketches or something.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, what else are you going to do when it's dark all the time except for like, do
Doodle
colored
wood
pencil sketches?
Maybe it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Stuart, about working with your hands. And sometimes those things take longer to make. Like if you're carving something, it takes longer, and your brain can almost distill that design longer. Maybe that's kind of
maybe meditate on the design.
It's like
a
a
bit
meditative
longer.
act.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, definitely. And there was as I said, I mean, I learned how to draft by hand, and there was a certain, I don't know what the word is. Is it a pious kind of pleasure in like, forcing myself to do those things?
Yeah.
But I was pretty proud of the drawings. That's why I got them back.
Yeah,
they wanted to keep them. I was like, no, I want them back.
Yeah, these are the originals.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Original.
So how long? So was this the design that they ended up? This was the design they ended up choosing, or did they do all of your?
They prototyped 4 of mine, and then 2 of them finally made it to production. So there was that one and a wall lamp.
How many ideas did you present?
Probably about 8, I think.
Okay, so you did 8 full-size colored pencil drawings.
Yeah.
They chose 4. They went forward with 2. You said.
Yeah.
That's cool. And so, how long did they run in this? Were they every store or?
Yeah, worldwide.
That's amazing.
It was, it was great. My name was on the box, and I kept the packaging for these things because it was like designed by Stuart Harvey.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool.
And they were in the IKEA catalogue. We went to visit the facility where they photographed the IKEA catalogue. It's about the size of, 3 football fields. It's probably even bigger now.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not, because do they even still make an IKEA catalogue?
Yeah, they do. I mean, at least I feel like I've seen one recently.
I'm sure they do.
Do you think now they just have people living in those scenes and they just like Jane Goodall take pictures of them in the wild?
I do actually think that a lot of the IKEA catalog photos are now renders.
Really?
I don't know who told me that, but I do notice that a lot of them do look rendered.
I don't know.
Because they
I'm sure
had
it's a
like
mix,
full
but-
environments, like full room environments set
Right.
up in these huge hangars, as it were, where they did all the photography of all the products for the catalogue. And I'm not sure how true this is, but somebody told us, and this was back in the early 2000s, they said that, on any given day, more people read the IKEA catalogue than read the Bible.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, I certainly preach from the IKEA catalog. But yeah, that's amazing. Back to some of the other work. I am curious about like what you have seen over your career in terms of the clients, because like you've gone from the agencies, and I mean, I guess startups have kind of always been around, but maybe what we're seeing now more of, and what you've been designing more of, is sort of this direct to consumer type design. And so what has that been like? Has that been really invigorating, like creatively, or can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, we split the work that we do between startups and more established companies. And one of the things that I love about working with startups is that you're working with people that have such a passion that they're prepared to give up, a potentially, well-paid career, spend their savings on this idea that they have. And, it's really refreshing to work with people that have that amount of excitement. It can also be a bit exhausting because they're living and dreaming this thing, every single minute of the day.
You have to shut your phone off at a certain time.
A little bit, yeah. But by the same token, for the right people, not for every client, I'm going to say I'm available on the weekend as well. Because if they need to talk through issues that they're having, I mean you can't. They're living this thing like 24/7,
right?
And I can't be. I'm 9 to 5 on a Monday to Friday,
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not that common, but so that's super exciting about working with the startups. In terms of the products themselves, I don't know if many of the products we've designed from startups are intrinsically any different from what we would have done to go straight to retail. And there are a few things that you consider about, I'm almost ashamed to say it, but you do consider things like how well is this going to photograph for Instagram and whatever.
Sure.
It's like if we're doing a pan, we try and make sure there's a branding element somewhere near the main body of the pan, not all the way down the end of the handle, as it were.
Yeah.
Little things like that, and certainly, we usually are working with them on the packaging, on the unboxing experience, and that type of things. And it was through doing that we started, doing more and more work on the branding side of things. So, Harry's came to us. They'd engaged a brand agency, so they already had their kind of positioning strategy in place. Our job was to translate that into the physical product and packaging. But a lot of people started coming to us that really had the idea for a product, but didn't really know where they were going to sit within that ecosphere. So that's why we started helping them out, doing like initial product positioning, brand positioning, and then that led into brand identity, and because we were doing the packaging anyway for the most part.
Do you have a good like your favorite example of that, where they came to you with just the idea and you wanted to do the brand and the packaging and everything?
Well, these guys, hell, they came to us with an idea. They came to us with the most well-researched deck I've ever seen. Like, so well-researched that it was actually too long to read. But they'd seen an opportunity to do refillable deodorant. Yeah. There's for a number of reasons, And so, we worked with these guys on the initial positioning. We did the naming, we did the logo, we did the packaging design. We introduced them to the agency that did their initial website.
Yeah.
The whole kit and caboodle.
Is Prime, is your relationship with these companies, is it purely client, or do you invest in them in any way?
Invest from like an emotional sense?
No.
Financial sense.
Yeah.
Like from my experience, sometimes you get the mom and pop people coming to you about Kickstarters and things like that. And a lot of them say, hey, I don't have the funds right now. Maybe equity is a better option. I guess, you said you split up your work between startups and more established companies. Is there some financial reasons there? Or
running an agency, cash flow is king.
Yeah.
So, we have invested in a couple of the people that we worked with on an equity basis. Mm-hmm. Occasionally we will work with people on a royalty basis instead of equity. You said you got a lot of, students listening to this podcast. Equity, I'm going to say, is a long game.
Yeah.
Only go there if you're prepared to pay the long game and stuff, because it's, a very illiquid asset. Basically nobody wants those shares that you've got.
Right.
Until somebody wants them.
Right.
And that could take 20 years.
That's true.
Royalties, there's a more immediate gain, but there's potentially not the same upside.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. We're running a little long, but that's okay. I think we can let it ride for a bit.
Yeah.
I do have another question, maybe one or two questions left. What do you think is the most challenging aspect of running this whole studio?
The most challenging aspect? You've stumped me.
I'm sure a lot of it's challenging, but it's...
Yeah.
Is there one thing that kind of sticks out, like, oh man, if only I wish I...
One thing that I've noticed, and maybe this work isn't... Maybe I missed it on the website, but it seems like you have stayed purely like product, like purely ID, purely packaging. You haven't really gone into the UX UI side of things,
right,
where you do see a lot of firms
dabbling
in that. Although now I feel like there's sort of a retraction of like, no, okay, we're just pure ID.
Yeah.
What was the like the reason for that? Was that just purely like, this is my expertise and this is what I want to sell as my expertise, or was there another reason for that?
No, I think it's it's a question of just being honest.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've always been by nature collaborative. So, you know, occasionally we'll team up with like external engineering resources if something comes on board that's like outside of our internal capabilities. You know, like I said, I mean, we work with IP people on the side. We work with consumer research agencies. We work a lot actually in conjunction with branding agencies. And it's part of that, I guess, like a feeling of somewhat of security that, like, you know, if somebody comes to us with a job that requires, you know, some more UI work that I don't feel that we really are the best people to work with it, then I'll just tell them go work with the best people. Because in the end, we just want the end project to be, you know, the end result to be as good as it can.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't feel the need to own every part of everything.
Right.
You know?
But was there any time in the firm's history where you were like, oh God, if we don't do some UI work, we're not going to have work coming in? Because it seemed like that was the panic maybe,
right.
But maybe that was because those firms had gotten so big, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I didn't ever feel that.
Yeah.
I also think
That's
it's
great.
I also think it's interesting. You've stayed a fairly small studio.
Yep.
You've been in New York for 2 decades, or Prime Studio has been in New York for over 2 decades. Is there any insight behind like a staying small? Because I feel like it seems like you could have expanded if you wanted to, or maybe contracted. I don't know. Maybe I kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think for 2 reasons. So one of them is that, you know, I've always liked the idea of designers interacting directly with the clients. Mm-hmm. And I think when you get to a certain size, that's when you need to have project managers or account handlers come into play. And I think that a lot can get lost in translation. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that happen when we've done collaborations with bigger agencies on some of the bigger programs we've done on the graphic side of things. So, you know, that tends to be more how those firms are set up. And I always liked that the clients had direct access to the designers and vice versa. Yeah. So that was kind of one reason for staying small or smaller. And I think that perhaps another reason was just that it requires a whole different kind of management structure in order to grow the size above a certain number, the size of an agency above a certain number.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I just didn't really ever feel the inclination. Now, has it hurt us perhaps that we've maybe lost some projects because people thought that we were too small to handle them? Maybe, but I don't think that many actually.
So there was never a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, we just keep getting more projects, we should keep expanding, or were you like always just let's keep it small, let's, you know?
No, it was never like a conscious like, oh, we're not going to take that project because we don't want to grow.
Right.
But there was definitely times when we've not done projects or turned down projects because we didn't feel that we would be able to dedicate enough attention to them. You know?
No, that's really interesting insight. Yeah, I mean, I do really like that aspect of letting the designers talk to the clients. I think that's super important.
Yeah,
for sure.
When you say that, you mean all level of designer that's working on the project, or
yeah. I mean,
awesome.
our interns sit in on client meetings.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, that's such an amazing opportunity for them, because I feel like, at a larger company, it's like, well, you know, sit this one out. We're going to give you that project that actually isn't going anywhere.
Right.
The fake project.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, I think that, you know, the absolute best thing that we can do for the people at intern here is just to expose them to as much of the actualities and realities of everyday design, as it were. And part of that is client meetings. Yeah. And part of that is learning how to present to clients.
Yeah. Do you sit them down beforehand though, and you're like, listen, I'm going to let you in on this meeting, but if you say one word.
No, I actually quite often have them present.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's
on a boat.
I'll have to try that one on a stand-up paddleboard.
Oh man.
That'll be the Prime boot camp.
Yeah.
Well, Stuart, we always like to ask, one kind of last closing question. And, what are you excited for in the future? Maybe it's with Prime Studios, or maybe it's just industrial design or just the design industry in general. But, how do you see the future going forward?
How do I see the future? Well, it's crystal ball time, yeah.
Or just what are you particularly excited about currently? Or yeah.
Well, on a super basic level, we're actually designing some more cast iron at the minute, and
okay.
I love cast iron, so I'm very excited about that. And I don't get that hands-on in that many projects at the minute, but that's when I'm hands-on in.
Okay.
Yeah, so
what is it that you love about cast iron?
Yeah.
This is cast iron cookware.
Yeah, cast iron.
Not
cookware.
just
That's solid
well,
blocks.
I think maybe it's a throwback to the time in the steelworks.
Yeah.
And that loving of molten metal. I mean, when we started working with Field Company, the first thing that we said to them when they said, "Oh, we're going to be using a foundry out in Indiana," was like, "I need to go to the foundry and see what they can do." I just wanted to see it. But it's also important as well to understand what the manufacturing process is, so that you can understand how to design a better product. I mean, the first iteration of pans that we did for them, we got a lot of breakage in the handles because as they go down the breakout line through the casting machines, so we had to tweak the design in order to be strong enough. And unless you've seen that firsthand, it's very hard to design for it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Stuart, thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. This has been wonderful. We can find you on Instagram at @primestudio_NYC, correct?
Yeah, though I think we might be just about to change that.
Oh, you're about to change channel.
For now, you can find us at primestudio_NYC.
We will make sure to link it on the website and in the notes, so you guys can find it. And then also your website.
Yeah, primestudio.com.
Okay, awesome.
It's all very simple.
Awesome. That's awesome. Again, thank you, Stuart. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, it's been really
great.
great.
I really appreciate it. I've very much enjoyed the conversations. It's like a bit of a trip down memory lane, really.
Yeah, you were like, I'm not sure if I can fill an hour. And I'm like, let's keep going.
We have interviewers say that all the time. They're like, it's going to go long. It's going to go long. All right.
You've had such an amazing career so far, and we're excited to see what Prime, does in the future.
Definitely.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate the time, guys.
Yeah, thanks. And as always, I'm at Nick P. Baker.
I'm at I Drawn Receipts.
Peace.
Later.